Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, Moriel Schottlender, who is currently a principal software engineer at Wikimedia Foundation. Moriel joins us from New York City in the United States. Moriel Schottlender, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Ooh, there's quite a lot, but I think that there are three that I would say are crucial. Clear idea of ownership of the code, I think, is one, and that might mean which piece of the code is owned by who, and what does that mean? And ownership not just by who in terms of person, but the rules around it. So having a definition of what it means to contribute or to work on a piece of code. The second I would say is modularization helps, and that's because it helps with ownership, I think. So it helps to, if the code is spread all over the place, or if a change means impact everywhere, that's harder to maintain than if something is more modular. And the third would be documentation, which people a lot of times either attempt or fail at. Some succeed, but it is crucial, I think, to well-maintained code.
I want to touch on that, the topic around ownership. In particular, you mentioned we could probably all imagine a safe assumption that maybe everybody can kind of wrap their head around, like, well, I own this project or this part of the project, and you or this team is going to manage this other. What other sorts of things you were talking about, like kind of rules around it? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes. So if you own a piece of code, it's not just about who will fix the bug when it comes up. Because if you have a code for a long amount of time, first of all, a lot of times people change. So the team might own this, but the people change, and then you lose some of the knowledge or intent that you had. So the ownership should also come with whether kind of like the rules or the architecture and the purpose of this code, that you know that this should stay. And it should connect to documentation. You should document those. And it should be clear either from the structure of the code and or potentially with documentation and declared. So you have some sort of design that you go by it and stuff like that, so that within time, and that design is usually a living document, so you can kind of like adjust it. But something needs to show whoever comes in, either you in a year when you forgot completely, or someone else that replaces you in the team or joins the team, need to understand not only, okay, tactically there's a bug, I need to fix it, but strategically, holistically, what is the meaning of this piece of the code, so that you keep maintaining a well-defined kind of like piece of thing, and it doesn't start very well maintained and then devolved into not, right? So that is what I'm talking about in terms of ownership. What are the rules around contributing into that code?
What are some effective strategies that you've seen teams take, or maybe teams that you've been a part of, or maybe not take, to, if they don't feel like they have that now, to start, or at least a question like, well, do we have clarity around that? Or is it just like, if you feel like it's not there, then you probably should have some conversations as a team? And then if so...
So I think everything, and this tends to sometimes be a little contentious for some reason that I don't know, maybe because of potentially misunderstanding what it actually means to engineers. But I think that one of the crucial things to do that is product ownership and product vision and product view. And an engineer could do that. Like if you have a small project that you're working on and you don't have anyone else, you can also be the product owner of it. But there needs to be a product ownership in terms of very clear, or as clear as possible, what is the purpose of this code or this system or this subsystem or whatever? Where am I going with this? What is my vision to it? What should it not do? And I think this is one of the crucial things we as engineers sometimes forget, because we get so excited about a library or a piece of code, and we're like, ooh, it could also do this, and could also do that. And everything you add in adds complexity, maintainability, or reduces maintainability, and adds a lot of thinking towards the future, and then kind of lose coherence, right? So if you start with something and you're kind of like, I'm not entirely sure I have it. Well, do you know what the purpose is of your code? Like, do you have it set? And if not, think about this, and maybe even write it down, and have a clarity. Do you think you have it and it's not suitable anymore? Okay, think about what it means right now. Do you know why your users, what users are you actually, right? Like, who your target, who are your stakeholders on this? And then, how is your code, like, do you understand what is the structure of your code, and does that answer everything? Like, is it modular? Are there any purposes for that? If it's not, is there a reason maybe to start? So that's how I would say kind of approach this, and that's how you know if you have it. And the whole point of it is to make it very easy for you to understand what to fix, what to do, and how to maintain the code in the future. Even if it works now, it's great, you left it aside, and you come back to it in like 2 years' time, and you remember nothing of it, and now what? And well, if you have a clear purpose and a clear structure, it's a lot easier to come in and say, oh, okay, this is what I meant to do with this, how to continue.
Hey folks, it's me, Robbie. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus they're certified ISO 27001 and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. I'm thinking when projects are kind of in their infancy, when you're kind of exploring and you're trying to figure out, well, you have an idea for something like, oh, I'll use software to help solve that problem. And maybe you're building a web application or a website or something with that, using that as this particular example. And so you've got some specific ideas. And like, let's say you're going to build something, we'll call it a wiki or something, and like rebuild this thing. And like, we're going to allow people to edit content. Where's that kind of line around like, well, early on, do you feel like teams should be more open to just like experiment and explore things and then see where that guides you? Because how do you kind of define like what it shouldn't do when you don't really know exactly what it should do?
So that is very relevant, in fact, to the software that we work with. Because if you look at Wikipedia, right? Wikipedia started out, so the software behind Wikipedia is called MediaWiki, and that is the software that supports all Wikipedias. We have about 900 of them. Some of them are not just Wikipedias, Wikibooks, Wikispecies, so they do slightly different things, but they're all doing, collaborative editing of content together with multiple people at the same time, with history and stuff. And it started out, I don't think that anyone saw where it would get to now, 23 years ago. So it started out as something kind of like, let's see how it goes, and then it evolved. So you'd want to give that opportunity for your software. But there is a question here. We look at the software today, and it is a little messy, and it is a little, right? Like, it's definitely working. Don't get me wrong. It's working. It's very impressive how it works. But when you look at kind of like the maintainability and stuff, we have challenges in there because of this idea of kind of like it grew so organically that it is a challenge now to deal with it. And this is an interesting question because there is a question of balance here. You, on one hand, want to create a situation where you have an architecture in mind and you have a design in mind, kind of before you delve into things. But on the other hand, you don't want to take 3 years now just thinking, theoretically about how something could happen without doing anything because A, things change, and B, that is not realistic at all. And so I think it really depends on what you're doing, right? And so I think that it's two things. A, it depends on what you're doing, and B, your iterations need to include design iterations. And so you can totally start out with something that is kind of like a hackathon-y project, a proof of concept. You start out with something. Hey, this is a thing. I had a thought. I mean, you would want to keep in mind kind of like, well, I'd like to make it a little bit like, componentized maybe to make it happy. But it's fine for you to just kind of like, here's a proof of concept kind of thing. Here it is. Let's see how it works. As long as you set yourself up with some goals, right? Like, I don't know, sprints, or in 3 months' time, let me take a look at it, or as it grows, I'm looking at it. And then not only try to adjust the system to make sure that it's good, but also think about your architecture. And when you're in the beginning, sometimes it's a lot easier to say, whoa, I thought my library or my wiki, whatever, would go one way, and suddenly the user's actually taking it a different way. That is really cool. But that means what, right? Like now you stop and say, hang on a minute. are the things that I did when I first programmed this going to accommodate maybe some of those things that they're leading to? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe I can already foresee some stuff. There's also a difference between starting to foreseeing a limitation of feature, like, will I enable or not? Like, you want to be able to be as flexible as possible, but there are ways to do your architecture, right? In a way that so if you already see that you're developing something that the users are kind of like taking in different directions, you can tell yourself already, what kind of architecture should I have in my system to enable that, to enable a little more flexibility? Now, nothing will give you, right, the proper example for now and forever. That's it. I did it once, I'm done. Obviously not. But if you continue in your iterations of the code, because we're all talking about, in the industry, let's be agile, let's iterate on code. I'm also a very much proponent of iteration of code, of just doing something, testing it, keeping on doing. But to do it right, you need to have a couple of things. First of all, be willing to then let go, to say it failed, because otherwise experiments are meaningless. And the second thing, when you iterate, do not forget about the holistic thinking, not just the code thinking. And I think if you do that, then that is a good balance between, I want to just get something out there and I want to try it out, but also I don't want to let it just go wild in a way where I can't tame it anymore. And how you do that really depends on then later on what kind of software you're releasing. Is it an app? Is it a small thing? Is it a bigger thing? Is suddenly you see it split up? Maybe you decide it needs to be two things. All that kind of stuff just depends on you, how you look at your code and your software.
I wanted to dive in a little bit into the journey of or MediaWiki's platform, but how long have you been part of the organization now?
Oh, I think 10 years now. I started as an intern, actually.
Do you remember what some of your first contributions were from? Was that on a coding type internship, or was it a different type of area of the organization?
Oh, I absolutely remember. So one of the exciting things about Wikipedia is that we're open source, and so anyone can contribute. Anyone can edit, obviously, but also anyone can contribute code. Not every code will be merged. Obviously, there's code review and stuff like that. But everyone can literally come in if there's especially if they're fixing a bug or adding something in. And I remember when I started out as an intern, I was fresh out of kind of university. I worked in computers for a long, long time. I developed software, but this was my first time being kind of industry and oh my gosh, this is Wikipedia. And as a testing thing, I installed my developer environment and just literally as kind of let's see if things work, my developer environment works. I fixed a bug with right to left language. Wikipedia supports 320 languages, and we have, I think, 16, I may be wrong about this number, but around that number of right-to-left languages that are written right-to-left. It's Arabic and Farsi, Hebrew, and all those languages. And so there was a bug. I actually remember exactly what bug it was. It was a bug about citations. So the number of citations. I don't know if you read Wikipedia, you can see that there's little numbers on top that give you citations. That number there was a little bit of a CSS bug when it had to do right to left. So I went in and I fixed it up. It was literally I think 4 characters that I changed in there. It wasn't that much. Posted it, and then, someone reviewed it, said, yes, it got in, and I was so impressed with myself because a week later, refreshed Wikipedia, the Wikipedia, and that was me. And I went to all my friends, and no one noticed because it was such a small bug and nobody cared. But I was all look at this. Look, it used to be broken, and it's me. So I did that. A CSS thing.
It's good that you can remember that. I wish that I could remember some of the first things that I ever had, first bugs I fixed in projects, and because it was a couple decades ago now. But I have memories of specific bugs and stuff that came later. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. And then you get to do something like that on such a publicly accessible thing. You take some pride in that, and you should take some pride in that. And because it's open source, we can all go look that up and go find it.
Oh yes, it's probably, by the way, well, this one is a CSS, but probably my initial ones. I'm not entirely sure I want everybody to look at. So
I can appreciate that. Yeah, don't ever go look for Robbie's old SourceForge code, please. We don't need to go there. But I was thinking about MediaWiki's platform, and what are some of the key challenges that the organizations face when trying to modernize such a massive 23-year-old monolith? And can you remind me what the tech stack is? That Perl or PHP primarily? PHP, that's right.
PHP. We are primarily PHP in the back end, and we use JavaScript. So we have primarily PHP, JavaScript. We do have some stuff in a little bit other languages with some of our services, but primarily the platform itself is PHP with JavaScript. This is a very interesting question, and some of it we don't have an answer yet to it. We're experimenting right now. So we are in the process of figuring out how to modernize Wikipedia's architecture, specifically MediaWiki, the platform, and how to relate to it as a platform. Because up until now, it's incredibly impressive how it just grew from what it was 23 years ago into what it is right now. So I don't know how many people know this, but we actually are not just Wikipedia, and definitely not just English Wikipedia. We support English Wikipedia and 300 other languages. Now, each other language is not a translation, it's its own community. So they have different rules for themselves, and they have different ways of work. So some of the system kind of workings could be different between each community, which means features could be a little different. Mostly we have the same similar features, but not all of them. So we need a lot of flexibility. But then on top of Wikipedia, we also support 11 other types of wikis that each has, more or less each has also languages. So we have Wikibooks and Wikispecies, and I'm going to forget a whole bunch of them. And then each one of those has communities. And then on top of that, we have Commons, so Wikimedia Commons that has files. It's a media repository that you can download videos and images for free, share. And we have Wikidata, which is a completely radically different way of kind of like contributing and reading data, which is a structured data. It's a data that is very short form and linked to one another. All of those are supported by the same underlying software called MediaWiki. And I think this is both the impressive thing, but also the challenge. Because all of it grew organically, and it's really impressive how we managed to kind of like look at all the stuff we can do with this software. But when you look at the architecture and then you say, okay, we need to modernize, you're looking at it, and a lot of times you say like, is it reasonable for a single piece of software that is monolithic to do all of these for the future? And a lot of times the answer is probably not quite. We actually need to look at it and say, where could the answers be different than what we answered 20 years ago when the world was different? There are certainly a whole bunch of things that we had to invent. Wikipedia was first. We had to invent. But today, there are alternatives that the world is using. So people did not start using our thing that we invented. They used other things. I think the biggest example, and by the way, that will likely not change for us, but it's the biggest example, is Wikitext versus something like Markdown. The world today is using Markdown, right, everywhere. And that is also, it makes sense. We're not. We're using Wikitext. It's our own markup language. To be fair, also, I'm not entirely sure if Markdown can answer all the needs we have. We have very, very complex stuff that we need to do, and Wikitext is doing that. But these are examples of kind of like there was no Markdown back 20 years ago, right? We had to invent it. And so when you come into that and you say, all right, this is really impressive. This software does a lot. We needed to continue doing that. But we also needed to start evolving into modern and to be more maintainable and more, how do we do that? And that's a tough question. And I think that one of the first things that we have to do, and that's one of the things that we actually did do a year ago or a couple of years ago, is to start looking at this platform as a product platform. To start looking at it again and start saying, okay, what is the purpose of this? Where are we? What are we prioritizing? What is the vision of this platform? And this is what actually happened. So the foundation prioritized a product leadership for the MediaWiki as a platform, and an engineering group that is literally prioritizing looking at the software first for maintainability issues, so like fixing the bugs and doing that, but also, and more importantly, I think, the product goal. And once you have that, and this is what kind of like this year was a little bit about, and now the next year we're starting to say, okay, now we have a vision of it. We have kind of like, all right, it's doing all of these things, but the vision is we're going in slightly this direction, and we have product ownership and product direction. We can say, what would that mean then? Can we start moving towards modern? And so you can only start talking about architecture and modernized technology when you have a product purpose. Code for the sake of, technology for the sake of technology usually fails. You have to have technologies for the sake of something purposeful. And something purposeful, the more accurately it is defined, or the more kind of vision you have, the clearer it is. I'm not going to say the easier it is, because it's never easy, but the clearer it is where you need to go technologically.
We'll be back with our interview with Moriel in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robbie. Just want to take a quick moment to say thank you for making time to listen to the podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help spread the word. Also, do you know someone in the industry you think I should have on Maintainable? Shoot me an email to robbie@maintainable.fm. Or maybe you can just head over to Wikipedia and say, create a Robbie Russell page and say, Robbie should interview these people. I don't know. Anyways, now let's get back to our interview with Moriel, Schottlender. I'm curious about that sort of scenario where you needed to, as an organization and the community of all the people that contributed to that. Do you roughly have any idea of how many different developers have contributed to the project?
Numbers. I actually do not off the top of my head. I have the numbers. But there's a lot, and we have a lot of rather big volunteer community of developers that contribute. Absolutely.
When I think about that sort of scenario where you had to kind of invent things and create things and just kind of evolve organically as the need for the contributions came in and everything that was able to help sustain that, the energy, the inertia, and then to think about modernizing it in a way. And then where do you find that line of like, is it not already modern? How do you define what modern is? And are you chasing something that you perceive? This is just me kind of like being kind of like an armchair curiosity person, just like, can you ever catch up to modern? Where is that line between what's is or isn't modern if it's working now, but it could be better?
That is a perfect question. It is a perfect question because we're asking this too, right? Because there are trends online. We see them. So for example, online trend, TikTok. Online trend, Instagram, right? Like all those short videos. And there's a question for us, also in our communities, we're talking about or the ChatGPT, whatever, right? Like the trends. And the question is like, are these fleeting trends or are these like trends to stay? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows, right? Like we can assume that there are certain things that probably will change the way that we, consume stuff. Okay, but what are we going to do? And we're not fast enough a lot of times, and we're not alone in this, to kind of like pivot and pivot and pivot. And if you do pivot, you tend to lose exactly what I was talking about before about like the cohesiveness of your product vision, right? So that is an excellent question. What does it mean to modernize? Does it mean to like run after modern stuff outside? No. What it means to modernize is in terms of the architectural thinking about your product. So you have a product that organically grew, right? Or a product that you developed 20 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, when thinking was a certain way, because the world in terms of software was a certain way. Today, the software world changed. A lot of principles changed. We have a lot more things like, new ways of libratizing, new ways of releasing, new ways, stuff like that. And new ways of thinking towards flexibility of the software. So when we're working right now on trying to modernize the architecture, we're not necessarily saying, okay, I want to create a capability of, validating TikTok movies, whatever, right? I'm not necessarily thinking of that. I might have that in mind of kind of like, these are the type of things people might want. But when I'm thinking about the architecture, I'm trying to think to myself, what kind of architecture do I need to promote or do I need to start going towards that is flexible enough to try and think about different types of content, or that's flexible enough to try and get our users more involved in producing themselves things that right now Alexa is producing for them or stuff like that, having more control over that, right? What kind of architecture can I do that is flexible enough to move? Now, the answer is not always very, straightforward or easy, but when you're not looking at specifically the actual trends, but you're looking at towards, I know that I'm going to need to be a little bit more pivoty, like flexible. I want to be able to allow external things to use my data. So you do see trends that are architecturally sound for long term, regardless of is the things that are going to utilize my data Siri or ChatGPT or some new thing. I don't care. I need something to be able to use my data, which was not true 23 years ago, or not true in the same way, right? 20 years ago. And so that's how I would approach the idea of kind of like, how do you balance between those two? With kind of like, chasing the modern or modernizing.
I don't know enough about the tech stack, but does MediaWiki provide many APIs to expose data, so it's not just scraping stuff from the web, I'm assuming?
Oh, yes. We have a whole bunch of APIs. We actually have several types of APIs. We have action APIs. The APIs and they're free and they're open. I think the thing about kind of like, how do we consume the data? Yes, we have APIs, but the question comes to kind of like, is that in the future the only way or the best way that we have to allow some of the tooling that we see that should use the data to use? And I don't have an answer for that yet. Like it's not something that we did, but it is an answer. It is a question that is an interesting one. Like, do we need to, is an API where kind of like you send a query and you get back answers enough? Do you need something like a data pool? Do you need something more structured, like a little bit more similar to the Wikidata stuff that we have right now, where it's more more like GraphQL-ish, right? Where you look for relationship between things. Those are the type of questions that you ask. And the answer might not necessarily be, yes, we need that. The answer could be, if we would have liked to have the flexibility to allow some of our data to go that route, what would we need architecturally to enable that, right? And right now, a lot of the answers are, well, we are a monolithic software where if you want to create a small change in one small place, it actually impacts everything. And so one of the first steps that we need to take is probably modularize better. And if you modularize better, you have better flexibility. So you go at it with steps to kind of like start thinking. But yes, absolutely, we have APIs. We're also thinking about the future of our APIs. But again, usage changed and the volume changed, right? Like there's a difference between users who build tooling to make editing better, and there's a whole bunch of those, and they're really impressive actually, and I don't know, something like ChatGPT needing to read Wikipedia constantly, right, on changes or stuff like that in order to build, and that is a much more massive scale and stuff like that. So are these going to be the same API? Is this the same use case? Or those are questions that I don't know the answer to, but those are interesting questions to keep in mind when you're looking at where to go in terms of architecture.
Given the scale and age of MediaWiki, how do you're talking about like where you're going and like thinking about modularization, but I'm assuming there's probably maybe a quick backup question. Do you use the metaphor technical debt at all?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And so what's your take on that? Like, how do you, presumably MediaWiki has some technical debt involved. And so how do you, as an organization or teams, think about how do you prioritize that type of work? And how do you think about that, what you can do, internally versus what you can kind of lean on the open source community to contribute?
Yes. It's a big question. I think that we're going at it with a multi-pronged approach, right? So we have yearly planning where we're trying to prioritize things. With this kind of software and also this kind of scale, you never can prioritize everything, obviously, right? Like, we need a whole bunch of stuff that we need to do, and the question is like, what do we do first? And that's a good question, and it will always be kind of like, I think this should be first, I think this should be first, and something will be picked to be first. That's just it. And so what we're doing right now is actually we have a couple of tracks for the past year too, and for the next year, a couple of tracks for the way that we approach that. So we have a track about maintainability. So some of our teams are working very, very specifically about projects that will increase maintainability of the software. And then how do you do that is another big question of kind of like, you go at it with a small thing. Oh, we have technical debt here that if we fix it will be maintainable better and stuff like that. So, but you have a very clear track for that. Another track would be to make MediaWiki more accessible for more developers so that we can have more people to come in. And we actually have we had a goal to increase the number of developers that touch the platform code. And we actually overshot that goal by quite a lot, which was great. And a separate track, which is something that I'm directly working on, is have some experimentation and interventions done to the code that leads you towards more modularized, because you cannot just come into this kind of software and say, that's it, we're modularizing this way, boom. You have to have the software still working. It's too big for you to know what will actually work. Most of the decisions that were made that are now, we look at them as challenges, had a good reason to be made. Like there are challenges. So you have to do that in a little bit of an iterative way. But it is challenging to do architecture iteratively, right? So what we're doing now is kind of like there's this track of, can we identify areas in the code where we can do interventions that lead us towards introduce patterns that are better for modularization. And if we do that, we can test them, we can see that the patterns are good and start moving. So we go at it with multi-pronged. We treat that as, right, like the direct technical debt, and then with the modularization, kind of like around the technical debt, because that's a technical debt too.
Interesting. And so you're doing some experiments, seeing how that kind of works out, and then who assesses whether or not those experiments are working? Is it just like the team that's working in that particular area, or do you have that get bounced off of like the other?
Yeah, so we have metrics. We actually have metrics. It's really, really hard. We had a lot of conversation about that. It's really hard. Like there are certain metrics that you can create. Like, for example, I want to increase the number of people who contribute directly to the code from X to Y. Very clear, metric. You can actually measure this. Great. Success or not. Awesome. I want to make the software more modular is harder to check, right? So we do have metrics. So our metrics are more about the impact for this specific thing of kind of like how many interventions are we going to do to the software. So I think that our goal right now is 2. We might actually do 3, I don't know. I don't want to commit to anything, especially on air. But our goal is kind of like, 2 interventions that move us towards modularization of the platform. And that's how we're going to measure. It's not going to be only the team. The code is shared between everybody else. But we're going to start measuring. And then, because we're also treating it, this is kind of the first time that we're looking at it this way, right? So it needed to also, the goal needed to be a little bit iterative. So the goal at first was like, we're experimenting right now with how do we even do that? But we didn't want to say that the goal is just to experiment and think, because that is not a goal, right? So we said, okay, we're going to think about how to do that and then result with 2 tangible things that we're going to do. So here's our metric. And then the next year we can maybe start saying, now we know how to do this. Here's a new metric that actually is a little bit more, I don't know, focused or something, right? So we're also with the metrics, we're iterating and learning.
When you've got so many things going on in a piece of software like that, how do your teams kind of celebrate and identify like those small victories collectively? Like, do you have some patterns that you find that work well for you, or is that something you actually talk about and like need to improve upon? Or does it feel like the software is evolving quickly, or does it feel like it's collectively there's just this huge thing that's just like slowly rolling slightly up a hill or not, and you're like, we're all doing the best we can to keep this thing going? And
I think so, because we're public, I think that helps a little bit, because we're putting public updates. There's a monthly email about exactly this, so MediaWiki Insight email that everybody can go in, and that's where we celebrate a lot of stuff. We're really kind of like, we did this, which also helps the team, because you're right, in the even the clog of the day, you're kind of like, you're doing a lot of stuff and whatever, and then at the end of the day, you don't know if you were actually impactful, and then reading it from the outside and getting all the notices from the other users and fellow developers to say like, hey, that's actually really cool, gives you that feeling. So we're actually doing that. We're very public. I mean, does it help with all the time? I think all companies and all teams are like, trying to find the way on how to remind their people that they are very impactful. But we're very much trying when we, I think being public is helping with that.
When you're working on these kind of larger interventions, do you ever find yourself questioning if the experiment that you've decided to aim for is like, maybe we should have picked something different, or is like you feel like, no, we're fully committed to this thing. This is the thing we need to kind of see out. And since it's not necessarily coming from I'm assuming not coming from a direct product requirement, like specifically, it's like, hey, we're trying to make some changes that we think is going to be really good for the future, but it's very different sort of like thing than like, hey, there's a bug over here, or this, we're getting a lot of people needing this specific thing. We build it, ship it. Now they're able to do the thing that they needed to do. Great, problem solved. And these other things sometimes can feel a little bit more abstract at times.
That's right. Yes. So we are going at it with a product vision. So that helps kind of like navigate are we successful or not? And there's a goal to this. So the goal is not just, fixing the code just to fix the code. The goal is very clearly, we're fixing the code towards the goal that that product is aiming for the platform. And so that helps a lot. It also helps in measuring whether or not we were successful or not. But I think some of it is also how you define your goal. So because we defined our goal as basically, we're going to have 2 interventions to help modularize the system so that, because that wasn't the goal was not just modularize, there was a thing so that feature development is easier and simpler and streamlined. And so there's a clear goal on this. We want to make sure that feature development on top of the platform is streamlined and simpler and easier. And we're identifying that one of the things that we need to do is go towards modularization. That is somewhat vague enough for us to say, we're going to experiment this direction. Oh, that doesn't work. Here's another direction. There's another direction, right? And that is what we're doing now. We're calling these hypotheses. We're kind of like, if we do X, we're going to succeed. And then we measure it every quarter or a little less than that. In our case, we have a couple of experiments that are going, and we're trying to go. So then at the end, we do want something happen. We want to not have wasted our time completely. But the interventions, we didn't decide ahead of time. We're going to do X. We said we're going to do something that will increase this thing and make it easier. We think we should go this way. We ran into a wall. Okay, maybe we should go this way, or maybe we should adjust. So we are adjusting ourselves, but the goal setting is also helping us do that.
Hey folks, it's Robbie here. I want to take a quick break from the waves of our conversation to tell you about my company, Planet Argon. We're like the seasoned surf coaches of the software world, helping organizations ride the waves of their legacy applications with ease. Whether you need a little extra help paddling power with some staff augmentation or just the right guidance with fractional development services, we're here to keep your project afloat, no matter the size of the swell. We're experts in navigating technologies like Ruby on Rails, React, and Laravel, and we're ready to help your team catch the perfect wave. If you know of a company that's struggling to stay balanced with tech debt, legacy code, or needs a little extra help harnessing the latest features, send them our way. We'll help them carve a smoother, more modern path. Catch us online at planetargon.com. Again, that's planetargon.com. All right, let's dive back into the water or into the show. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks for kind of like thinking through that for me. I'm always curious how different organizations are thinking about these things when they're, especially when you got something so big. And I would be surprised if there's not sometimes people that are just like, why don't we just spin off a new team and just rewrite the whole thing, like Fantasyland or whatnot. Or maybe that's actually the goal. I don't know. But I'm assuming that's not remotely in the discussions probably.
I mean, anyone can fork MediaWiki. Anyone can do whatever. We are not planning to completely rewrite MediaWiki into something else. That's not going to happen.
But I'm going to go back to something you mentioned early on. We talk about documentation in particular, because documentation can be a weak point in many projects, especially in older code bases. So how do you ensure that documentation stays up to date, and what role does it play in helping overcome technical debt? Do you have the secrets, the secrets that we're all yearning?
Oh, gosh. Well, luckily, we're a wiki. And anyone can edit, and anyone can update the documentation. So I'm laughing a little bit, but that's actually true. Like that helps. That helps because users come in and then you immediately can update. You have multiple eyes on it and you update the documentation. But to tell you that we've solved it, no. We also have a problem with documentation, especially with the software that is so entangled and 20 years old and worked on by multiple people. We also have that. What we do have now, however, in the past couple of years that I think we didn't have many of before is a documentation expert team. And they have also started thinking a lot about kind of like, how to do the documentation better, how to make it more maintainable, how to expose a lot of it, because there's a lot of it in like different places, and some of it that was like, oh, actually, this is documenting historical thing. It's not real. It's like how to tag those and whatever. And they've been doing amazing work. To start, it's just a big thing. And I think one of the things that helped them and helped all of us, again, I'm coming back to the product idea, right? Like when you set up in the idea of documentation, you need to figure out like who needs to read this documentation. And with Wikipedia, there's different people needing to read different documentations. You have your users, editors who need to read documentation about how to edit. And then you have like admins that install Wikipedia on their website or MediaWiki, right? Or the wiki on the website that needs to know about like coding stuff. And then you have people who develop for Wikipedia or for MediaWiki for our cluster extensions that then they need to know how to, and you have different audiences, and a lot of times when a documentation is written for everybody, it fails, and so you need to know, whose audience and whatever, and they're dealing with that group has my adoration. They are dealing with a lot of those questions right now, with the strategy towards this, but it's not easy. Yeah, but I think it's a little easier when you have a wiki and then a whole bunch of other people that can help you, but you need a plan.
Right. I hadn't really thought about that particular unique aspect of your code base and as an organization and community of people contributing. You're working on basically a documentation platform of some sort in a way. And so it would kind of make sense that you would use your own tooling to do that. And so where do you find that balance between how much you document in the code versus in wikis related to talking about the code base and things like that? Or do you have some really like sophisticated like going on there that's like, how do you expose all that stuff?
So we are using some automated documentation tooling so that kind of like exposes their classes with your documentation. So we're usually taking quite a lot of care to make sure that the classes, like the actual code, has proper documentation, especially with the parameters and the explanation and stuff. And then it's being exported. We have, I think, doc.wikimedia.org. You have multiple kind of like documentation for either front end or back end of stuff. And then the wiki would be more about like the intent of this code, how to use this code and stuff like that, of kind of like, how, if you want to create an extension, how you do it, stuff like that.
That's helpful. I'll include some links to that for people in the show notes so we can I'm going to do a little bit of browsing around after we get off our conversation, because I'm actually just kind of curious about that. I think about community contributions with, from volunteers. So when it's something this large of a project, how does your team internally think about, like, how do you said that there's active goals to increase the number of contributions and you surpass that goal in the current time frame that you're currently measuring that. Is it just quantity, or is there a type? Do you think about, like, where do you navigate most of that work? Is that mostly being done somewhere within, is it like on GitHub or something, or GitLab, or do you have that all kind of hosted somewhere on in your own? Do you have tools that you built for yourselves for that sort of thing and to manage that stuff?
Yes, so we're using Garrett, which is a code review software, and we have some things on our installation of GitLab. So we have kind of like, either or. But this is coming back to kind of like what I was talking about, ownership being a little bit more than just like the person. It also means a little bit of guidance. Because when you do have a lot of people contributing to code, including volunteers, right, or external people, what you want to make sure is that you have proper guidance, because you want to enable them to contribute to code, but you don't want the situation where they contribute code and then you come back to them and it's like, that's not how we do things. What are you talking about? Blah, 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 right? Like, you don't want to discourage them and you don't want to waste their time. And so we do have a lot of tooling. So we have our CI has a lot of kind of, here is the basic like linters on how we expect code to be written. And that's kind of like, all right, there's a lot of documentation about this, and then CI. And so before you even meet a human reviewer, the bot will tell you, sorry, fix this. Okay. And a lot of those, by the way, it's really good that a bot does it because they are opinionated. We have decided that there is a space here. And okay. Right? So we have that as tooling. And then later on, someone comes in to review. And then we do have some guidances, right, in terms of like what we expect in terms of performance, what we expect in terms of privacy of our users, what we allow and not allow, or expect or not expect in terms of what is possible to do. There's a little less, but sometimes exists. I personally think that we need to do a little more than that, but there's also some guidance in terms of we expect this piece of software to have this type of structure, right? Like, the modules are this way. So if you add another module, here's how to do it. And so that helps, especially when you have a really, really big piece of software with a lot of people that are external, empower them to be able to contribute relevant things into the code that we can come in. And we, by the way, staff is not the only people who are merging things into core. We have volunteers who are trusted to merge things into core. But all of us are trusted to merge things into kind of like the platform or the features that we have, because we understand here are, the expectations of this, and here are the complexity and stuff of how to do it right? So like, do you want to enable someone, you want to encourage someone to come in, but you also want to encourage them and enable them in a way where you don't reject all the code that they worked on. Like, that's not fun, and that's a waste of time. So
no, that sounds really sensible there. And, for anyone listening that would be thinking about contributing to some sort of open source project and don't feel like they're ready, and whether or not it be MediaWiki or any open source, do you have any advice for them on how to push through that?
Yes. Generally, when people start out and they think they're not ready, let me tell you, in the industry, no one knows what they're doing, okay? Get that imposter syndrome in check. I am a principal, blah, 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 and I don't know what I'm doing a lot of times, okay? I think it's a sentiment that we need to remind our juniors and remind the new people that it's okay to kind of like, it's not just because you're juniors. Yes, a lot of things are experience. I'm not there, but it's fine. There are a lot of places out there that you can kind of find easy new bugs that a lot of open source places on GitHub, mostly, we have a list of those, can just let you, for example, we are missing a CSS rule. No one has time for that because we're working on other like bigger things. It's not prioritized for us. We don't have that. And it's something that probably someone completely new could come in and probably fix it because it's small, right? So we are not alone in this. WordPress has these kind of things, Drupal, all of those. There's a whole bunch. There's libraries that are smaller and they have these kind of things. So try to look for, and there's a lot of services I can send afterwards for maybe links for a lot of places where you can literally just see kind of like, here are open bugs and they're small and whatever, and choose one. Another thing that I would recommend is join communities, literally like the mailing list of, or the chat room of. There's Slack channels and Discord channels and Telegram channels, and everybody's everywhere to interact with people, because that's another thing that will help you get into stuff and get you help. And there's a lot of people who work on, hey, I'm working on this feature, and a lot of people really want it. So for Wikipedia, for example, we have a lot of bots that our editors are building to make their life easier, or a lot of kind of like these features, and they might need help, and they might need help that someone new can just come in and help with, right? So interacting with these spaces can also be something that is that making things easier to kind of like, what do people actually need? And maybe someone can help me get into things because they need help, and I'm here to help them.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'll definitely include some links for folks in the show notes for everybody. A couple of quick last questions for you. Is there a non-technical, non-software book that you like to recommend to peers?
Ooh, so I love books, so I have a whole bunch. But I think in this context, what I will recommend is the book Year Zero by Rob Reed. It is amazingly nonsensical, but awesome book that talks a lot about copyright and the sharing of information. It's about aliens, and it's amazing. I love it. I don't want to ruin it on one side, but I want to get you excited. It's about aliens that basically want to save Earth because of copyright issues of our music being like broadcast into the universe, and then other species listening to it, and is that a copyright violation? I'm going to just say that it is amazing. It's a really, really good book. I highly recommend, and it's kind of like tangentially related to like open source and open access to things and stuff, so why not?
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll definitely include a link to that in the show notes and have to check that out myself. That sounds interesting. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software development and engineering and modularization and all these fun topics online?
So I am on Mastodon. I'll send you the address. I'm Muipu, almost everywhere, but I'm on Mastodon. I am on X, Twitter over there. I am on GitHub, all of those as Muipu. I think those are the best. And then I have a website that you can contact me directly, moriel.tech, where you can contact me directly from various eras of the internet. I don't know if you played around with it, but...
I did. That was fun. I appreciated that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Maintainable, Moriel. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. This was fun.
Maintainability.